If you like sharks, then you're going to want to see climate change reduced before 2100, because there is a new study out that says that if in the worst case scenario, if we continue to develop fossil fuels the way we are now, that sharks will only hatch at an 11% success rate. That means newborn sharks will only have an 11% success rate of actually hatching. We're going to talk about why that's important on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about sharks and why we love sharks so much. We love sharks so much because they're interesting, they're mysterious, they kind of scare us a little bit, but there's a lot of different species of sharks out there. There's over 1,200 species of sharks, skates, chimeras, stingrays, whatever you want to call your different types of sharks, they're out there. There's over 1,200. We talk a lot about sharks over on the Beyond Jaws podcast that I co-host with Dr. David Ebert, aka the Lost Shark Guy. So if you ever want to hear more about sharks, check out that podcast. But really, when it comes down to it, we love sharks, and sharks are important to the ecosystem. They're essentially a predator, and they pretty much have a good formation and form what a food web looks like, because they a lot of times are apex predators, and we need to protect sharks as much as possible. We need to make sure that not only are they surviving in adulthood, but they're getting to adulthood. And to get to adulthood, you have to be able to hatch from their egg cases, right? That's what a lot of sharks do. They hatch from egg cases. And there's a study that came out that says, hey, you know what? The worse temperature gets and the more acidic the oceans get, the less we're going to have of sharks, because they're not going to be able to hatch properly. And so that's a problem that we're going to talk about today. Before we do that, though, if you're interested in news and you want to know more about the ocean news, this is your resource. As this podcast, I hope that this is your resource you come to learn about the new studies that are coming out, people that are doing them, and just overall how you can protect the ocean. That's the name of this podcast. But if you aren't getting enough of that and you want more information, you can sign up to our newsletter, where you get an email every single day of the week during the weekday. Of course, Monday to Friday, we send an email out 8 a.m. Eastern, and you get to learn more about what's happening in the ocean. You get to see what jobs are available, and you get to hear about what the latest podcast is, and you get to listen to it right in your email. So if you want to sign up for that newsletter, you can do so at speakupforblue.com/newsletter. All right, let's get back into this. Now, this original story was found on phys.org. I found this on the Cool Down. Cool Down's a great website to learn more about climate change. Gotta love that. So you get to learn about the studies that are happening, what people are doing, all about the climate change and so forth. So it's always interesting to learn about that. But this study was from a French PhD student named Naomi Coulon. She is at France's Laboratoire. It's been a while since I spoke French. Laboratoire de biologie, des organismes et des écosystèmes aquatiques. And her team has found some disturbing data involving oceanic warming and acidification that are affecting small spotted cat sharks. So these are just one species that they found, and that they did some experiments on, and they looked at some scenarios. And so what the whole thing is we know that extreme weather is here. We're seeing spikes in ocean temperature. We're seeing increases in pH, meaning if you know the pH scale from 1 to about 15, I guess, somewhere around there, normal pH of an ocean is about 8.2, 8.3, normally 8.3. As it gets less of pH, as the pH decreases, we're actually seeing more acidification. So it's getting more acidic. So 7 is about neutral. Anything under that is more acidic. And so when you start to see acidic water, you start to see the dissolving of anything that's made from calcareous material. So you'll see coral start to decay. You'll see mollusks like clams and oysters start to decay. Mussels start to decay. Scallops start to decay. Anything that has a shell, crustaceans such as shrimp and such as crabs and lobster, you won't see them grow as well because of the acidity in the water. The higher the temperature in the atmosphere, the more carbon dioxide that comes into the ocean, that carbon dioxide reacts with the calcium in the ocean, and there's less free calcium for those organisms to pick up, and so it becomes hydrocarbonic acid, I think, and so it becomes more acidic, and then you get acid water, and you get less crustaceans, you get less mollusks that have shells on them, and that is not good because those are habitats, right? You get less coral reefs as well. Anything that has a calcium-based shell, you get less of because it'll slowly start to wither away. It won't be as strong. And so what they're saying here is as temperatures increase and as acidity increases as well, you are going to get less of these types of organisms, including apparently small spotted cat sharks. And that's what this essentially study was about. That they said here, the hatching success of embryos is crucial factor for population dynamics. In the case of skates and sharks, which have a slow pace of life, low hatching rates could be critical for population renewal. This is Coulomb, the PhD student who shared this article. So luckily, we've gotten advanced notice about how environmental changes due to heat and pollution can affect not just ocean life, but every creature on the planet. So why is this information important? Studies have shown that warmer ocean temperatures impair cognitive function in fish, and abnormally high spikes in North Atlantic seas could lead to high mortality rates. The NOAA's projections for the year 2100 showed a pH and carbonate levels that could begin dissolving the shells of crustaceans. So this is like lobsters, shrimp, crabs, and so forth. Coulomb's team created several tiered scenarios for the future, and they basically went from less impact to most impact. So SSP2, or middle of the road model, which describes a future where progress towards reducing pollution is underway. This is what we're hoping to see, but net zero isn't achieved just yet. They offered an 83% survival rate of the sharks, but if you go to the other extreme, the SSP5, or the fossil-fueled development scenario, was quite dire. They were shocked to see the low survival rate observed in the SSP5 scenario, with only 11% of embryos hatching. So what is the problem with that? Is that you're going to have less sharks. You're going to have less, I think, small spotted cat sharks, which also could mean less sharks of other species of sharks and skates and stingrays that have these egg cases. There's something in the water when it's acidic that these egg cases don't do well. The development is not as good, and so we're going to start to see low development, low survival rates, and that's going to kill off a lot of sharks in the future. Now, what can we do? It's really take action against climate change. That is the big thing. More research needed on figuring out which species will be affected. But other than that, you want to find out how we can reduce climate change. Reducing climate change should be the biggest movement that we've ever seen. And we're starting to see governments work on that. Too slow, in my opinion, but slowly starting to work on that. But they need to do better. They need to start focusing on more advanced policies, stricter rules for emissions, getting back into policies that are positive for the environment, that are positive for the atmosphere, looking at equality and equity and within action, giving back local communities with help. It's everything. We need to throw the book at it. We need to throw everything we have and say, hey, you know what? We're going to reduce climate change. We're going to reduce climate change as much as possible, as fast as we can, and more governments have to act more aggressively. Now, it sounds easy to do, but it's not, right? You know this. Like, we've been talking about this for a long time. Climate change is a complex problem because there's money tied to it. There's businesses, there's industries that are tied to it that contribute to climate change. Unfortunately, a lot of those businesses have the backs of a lot of politicians who are in power now and will be in power later on. We have two major elections coming up in Canada and North America, or in Canada and the U.S. In the U.S., in November 2024, this year, there's a huge election for president as well as for congresspeople and some senators. And then, of course, in Canada in 2025, we have a big election, federal election, of who will be the new prime minister, or will Trudeau stay prime minister? Now, when you look at what we're looking at in terms of action for these different groups, one party is better than the other in terms of taking action. One party doesn't take action at all. So it really comes down to, do you want to see a future where you have seeing less change in the environment, or do you want to see a future where you're going to see a ton of change in the environment and it's not going to be good? It's going to be more expensive, more weather-related events, more natural disasters, and a lot of money going towards fixing that. And I don't know how we're all going to pay for that. We're going to get less services so that we can put our tax money towards that. No matter what country you live in, it's going to be bad. It's not going to be good. So the ways that you can help, according to this article, you can get involved in climate issues, talk about climate issues. You can support forward-thinking policy. So support the people who want to put forward forward-thinking policies and do your part in transitioning to cleaner tech, such as EVs, solar panels, and whatnot. I even think now they have heat exchangers and coolers. There's geothermal that can work as well. They're expensive. This tech is really expensive. It's very difficult to get. If you're not in a position to get that, do what you can. Get involved with your government. Get involved with nonprofit organizations that are working towards changing climate and making changes towards reducing climate change is what I really meant there. But that's really what it comes down to is, if you want to save these sharks, if you want to make sure that we are going to see sharks and other species continue to persist within the environment. Now, we're also not just talking about sharks that sort of, form a web or have influence over a food web, but you're also looking at, organisms that create habitats, some of the most diverse habitats in the world. You're going to have coral reefs, you're going to have oyster reefs, you're going to have mussels and clams and scallops, all that have shells that can form these complex systems, these complex habitats that provide hiding places for fish, that provide food, that clean up the water through filter feeding. There's a lot of benefits in keeping these organisms intact and reducing climate change to do that. The ocean can only take a certain amount of carbon dioxide before it starts to change, and it's already changing. We're already seeing huge spikes in temperature that we haven't seen before, and it continues to get hotter and hotter in that ocean. You can only do it so much where you're going to get a change where you just can't change back. So let's do our part. Let's talk about more climate issues. Let's start to talk about it with our government representatives or future government representatives and become a government representative, especially if you're into changing climate. And I think, just in the previous episode, we talked to Janelle Kelman, who is someone who is very forward-thinking. She's an environmental lawyer. She's also was the mayor of Sausalito City in California. She now sits on the council. She's running for lieutenant governor of California in 2026, where she will have influence over policies and programs that have to do with the environment, including the ocean. This is how you can get in. Lieutenant governor may not be the spotlight position that you'd want in government, but it's something that she can be most effective at in the background that she has and the motivation that she has to help save our planet one city at a time, one state at a time. I think that's a valuable lesson. If you want to listen to that episode, you can go back to the last episode, listen to that interview. It was a great interview. She has such great energy, loves the ocean, loves the environment, and she wants to protect it. And I think that's great. And that's what we need, more political leaders who do that kind of stuff and who want to be motivated to do that kind of stuff, or who are motivated to do that kind of stuff. So check that out. And of course, that's it for today's episode. If you want to have a conversation about this, you want to talk about this, please feel free to visit us on YouTube, because I'm starting to put out these YouTube video podcasts. I'm also putting the video on Spotify, where you can actually comment and or answer polls when they're there. It's a great platform. It's really turning into such a great platform for podcasting and interaction. I love the interaction because this is the start of a conversation that I want to continue with, hearing from you and what you think. What do you think of, whether you agree with me or don't agree with me? That's fine. I don't really mind. I'd love to just chat with you and hear your thoughts on all these items, especially, sharks being affected by climate change even before they're born. Like that's the crazy parts, even before they're born. So something that you can chat about. You can hit me up also on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean, and you can just DM me there. But there's so many ways to get a hold of me. You can use any which one you want. Love to hear from you. And thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.